Welcome to the Daily Archetype. I'm Isaac J. Miller. Today I have with me three awesome people who are going to talk about God, or the lack thereof, maybe in some cases. So today I have with me the archive and Jane Gatsby, who has got a really cool camera setup for us today, which we're really excited about. So let me just introduce everyone real quick. We thought we might have Rodney Norman with us, but he's a busy guy and he might make it. Otherwise, we'll probably do another one with him, by the way. So let me introduce everyone real quick and then we'll just get into it. We are going to talk about a article by Jordan Peterson, just a little bit on the nature of God to get things going, and then we'll see where it goes. So first of all, BJ, he is part of the archive and he's been on here and I've been on his, and we've been doing this for a little bit. So introduce yourself real quick, BJ.
Yeah, I'm just BJ Carpenter, co-founder of the archive with Connor. I'm super excited. It's nice to meet you, Jane. And yeah, I'm just ready to go down to Chinatown.
Cool. And then Connor, I guess, is in that same bucket of a guy from our Facebook groups and part of the archive. He's been on here a bunch of times. So introduce yourself, Connor.
Yeah, well, I feel like I've introduced myself so many times on your podcast. I'll just kind of keep it short and sweet.
Sure.
I originally had a podcast called The Daily Discussion. It did okay. It was kind of predicated on the idea that we would challenge ideas that were already well established. That's also a tenet of the archive's philosophy. But BJ and I have kind of come together to create the archive, which is like an amalgamation of like Jungian.
We've melded our philosophies
integral
together.
philosophy, occult, esoteric stuff. All
A
that
great
good stuff.
conversation.
And it spat out the archive. So
I like
and
it.
we are
All
here
right.
pulling ideas from the archive and talking about them, putting them back in the cloud at the end of the day, and not conflating our identities for our ideas.
Cool. And the special guest of honor, her second time on, Jane Gatsby from Wonderland. So tell us a little bit about yourself. You're the sort of new kid on the block. Go ahead, Jane.
Yeah, I just host a little podcast called Wonderland where I'm trying to develop a philosophy from first principles that then bleeds into politics and psychology and all sorts of other domains.
Cool.
absolutely.
Sweet deal.
That's awesome.
Awesome.
All right. So, BJ, do you have that article in front of you, or did you ever get to open, by the way?
I did finally get it to open. I have
Okay.
the article pulled up.
Will you just read that last paragraph that we talked about? Because somehow I don't have that in front of me, but that's the main thing we want to spur the conversation off with.
Sure, yeah. Are you ready? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so the final paragraph says, "It is for such reasons that the question of belief or non-belief in God, or in his existence or non-existence, is absurd. The real question is twofold. First, what is the nature of the relationship that is established with the totality of being, given that such a relationship is inevitable? And second, given that such a relationship is inevitable, why not make it all that it can be?" Jordan B. Peterson.
All right. So, Jane, I would like to start with you as the guest of honor to just tell us your first impression of that article, or specifically that last question or two of the article.
I like the article a lot. I definitely agreed with most of what he was saying. I think my issue with Peterson always just seems to be that, like, when he talks about God, what he's describing to me doesn't seem like the conventional notion of God as it pertains to like Judeo-Christian what have yous.
Right. Okay, guys. What are your guys' initial feedback or reaction from the article?
Unfortunately, I tried to pull the article up multiple times on my phone and I thought it was a bunk article, but it turns out it actually works if I just pull it up on my PC, which I never spent time on my PC. So I didn't quite get to read it until just now.
That's okay. We're mainly going off that last article and the last paragraph and the assumptions there. So what are your sort of like general reactions from that part that you just read?
So we talked about it a little bit before we went live, right? So Peterson says it's for such reasons that the question of belief in or non-belief in God is actually absurd. So he starts out with a sort of a claim, a value judgment that arguing whether or not God exists is absurd. And he gives two questions for why that is. And the first is that it seems as though God is this larger than us image or or like philosophy, or it's like ingrained in our social constructs to the degree that we
totality of
can't,
being is how he puts it.
yeah, we can't escape it no matter what we do, whether we believe in it or don't believe in it. It affects us, it controls us, we're influenced by this concept,
Right.
regardless, across multiple layers of our social order and social contract. And so I definitely agreed with that, that notion of why it's absurd to even discuss it. And then his second is, given that a relationship is inevitable because it's so big, why not make the best of this concept of God in and of itself? And that's kind of what I want to talk about with you all tonight, is when we get there, at least,
Yeah.
like flash forward to the future, it's the utility of the idea of God. And is that more important than actually knowing that God exists? So I'm going to throw all that out there.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. What do you think, Connor?
Yeah, I mean, I just thought it was the standard, traditional Jungian approach as far as what was being echoed throughout the whole article. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think sometimes Jung was more willing to approach the metaphysical implications of his theories. I think Jordan Peterson knows that he kind of has to play the role of a credible scientist, so he tries not to delve too much into that, like the deeper aspects of it. But I appreciated the article for what it was. I thought he was, trying to basically make the claim that God is like this force that's been reinforced in society for a long enough period of time, and therefore we can't help but embody certain principles or certain facets of the idea of God, even if God is not an objective force in the universe. So I don't have a problem with that claim. So
I want to kind of break this apart a little bit, and feel free to interject, and whoever's like just feeling frisky on some of these questions that we'll go through a little bit to kind of like break that apart. But the first question that I came up with to do so is like, is the totality of being, or I would call it conscious being, perhaps to be more specific, but that's tricky. So you could say being or conscious being, but is it something that we can call divine, the totality of being?
So I'll jump in and say yes. Sure. So this idea of a totality of an entire construct that sort of swallows up everything is the definition of divinity in the way that I would use the definition. It's sort of beyond physical, it's beyond reductive process. It goes outside of the realm and the confines of like logic and reason, and it swallows those processes up in its own meta, like referential process. And I always go to Gödel's second incompleteness theorem, which ultimately states that no system can exist of its own accord or its own process. Like all systems that we can understand as human beings almost require to go outside of the domain in which that system operates in order to reference back to its own self in another system, to perpetuate its own process act, to like define itself. And so this sort of like popcorn like nature of the novelty of reality, that entire process has to be withheld somehow, or like held together somehow by this totality, and that is what I would call divinity. Truly, I would agree with that.
Jane, I'm curious what you think. And by the way, the one reason I wanted to have Jane on is because she is a self-proclaimed atheist, but in a more nuanced way. And I feel like just from listening to her a few podcasts, she has a good understanding of both sides of the debate, in particular these that we get in here sometimes with this type of version of God, of that sort of like Peterson, Sam Harris version. So what about you, Jane, as far as the totality of being something divine and or a divine type of nature that we can interact with?
To me, what Peterson's describing in the article is like just sounds like my interpretation of metaphysics. And I talked about this with you last time. Like I view metaphysics as complexity theory, which is kind of a way of explaining systems and causality that are principles that persevere across time and space. And so to me, that system is a really good way of analyzing social relationships, but also like nature and physics and all these other forces. And so I can read that article with an atheist understand the conclusions he's drawing, but I don't read anything. Like, I guess it depends on how you're defining the divine.
how would you
Yeah.
define it in a way that may or may not work in this context? Divinity.
I'm not, well, it
Do you,
depends. Like
do
another
you buy into it?
Well, divinity in relationship to it being the totality of being, because basically what we're doing is we're sort of challenging this sort of first assumption that was made here. And so if the totality of being is something divine like or godlike or not, and some people, and it probably sounds more new agey, when it's just like interacting with the universe or the universe interacting with itself.
Sure.
It can kind of be like that. So that and our relationship with it, is that something divine in the way that you would think of something potentially divine but not necessarily like the Judeo-Christian God, or is
Right.
it
Yeah,
not?
I can get on board with like kind of the more Eastern notion of
Mhm.
God and divinity and spirituality, where it's something that you are a part of that
Right.
isn't separate from you. I think, but generally when I'm thinking about Judeo-Christian formulations, God is something that's separate from you,
Mm.
and it's its own entity that is exercising its own agency, right? Like because Peterson in the
Yeah.
article talks about he, and so
Right.
as soon as you're introducing like pronouns, it's like, well, now you're
Right.
describing a conscious entity that's exercising its will over the world, and that I don't
Right.
buy into at all.
Sure.
But the notion of like, oh, everything's interconnected and you and the universe are kind of part of this symbiotic relationship, absolutely.
Hmm.
And
Okay.
that's what you would call divine. Would you define that conceptualization of this metaphysical process? Would you define that as divine?
I don't think I define it as divine, but I can appreciate other people who do.
Okay.
Yeah,
Like
sure.
I can relate to that. I think I'm just not used to using that language personally.
Sure.
Yeah.
Connor, what do you think as far as this question? We don't necessarily have to do like every single person answer these
Sure. Yeah.
questions, but what do you think generally as far as that first assumption?
I mean, I think psychologically, the human race has always considered that which can't be quantified to be divine, or that which is non-material. And I think consciousness isn't actually an emergent property of the body. I think we're kind of like dogs who can't see color. There's so much going on all around us,
Right.
but we don't have the biological capacity to interface with it. But to a small degree, we've been given this thing called a psyche, or like a mental sphere, which allows us to interface with it in a limited capacity. So I think certainly,
So
it depends on as far as your definition of divine, like we're kind of figuring out. But I think ultimately the reason why it's divine is because it's always been considered divine, regardless of.
I have
Well,
a question,
but-
Connor.
Well,
go ahead.
but before that, real quick, what I'm generally curious about at this point, Connor, is if it fits with like what you would call divine. So like, because we're kind of just going off like assumptions for us here at this point. So like,
Sure.
does that fit for your sort of like definition of divinity or something godlike as far as the totality of all being?
Well, that's kind of what I was trying to get at, is that like,
Mm.
there's like all these hyperdimensional forces all around us that we don't have the capacity to quantify because our biology limits us from them. And I think that, it kind of reminds me of what Jane was saying earlier about God being like a separate entity. It's
Right.
like, yes, God exists outside of the universe, but as far as the claims of religious people goes, God is also a force that permeates through and as
Right.
the universe. So it's like,
Right.
yeah, and
And through the
I think
people.
if consciousness is a part of everything, then, and God is a part of everything, then yes, I would consider consciousness divine.
So there's two things
Sure.
that I want to say, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Jane talking about this sort of personal God versus this
Mhm.
non-personal God,
Right.
or non-personal divinity, and
Like
then
the
Connor's talking about
Cartesian
how
version.
sure, yeah, and Connor is talking about sort of like how consciousness is not an emergent property of the body, but our body hard limits this infinite consciousness that we all are a part of and holons of, which a holon is a part and a whole. So a human being is a part of some other process, but a whole human, and like a cell is a part of some process, but a whole cell. Like every permeation or manifestation of, or like emanation of this divinity is already infinite, but there are these emergent processes such as the body that hard limits the perception, which gives the illusion of separation and the illusion of individuality
Exactly.
and ego and id. I think that's what Connor's trying to explain. And I just wanted to throw in some seasoning salt really quick with this
Mhm.
elucidation of those 2 points together, because I definitely agree with Jane that I I run into issues and have qualms with personal gods. If personal gods are quote unquote divine, or the nature of their reality is true or untrue, that would still be an emanation or some emergent property that's like lesser than this totality, like this whole totality. It would be, if you can define it and if you can see it and speak about it, then it is not that thing. It's sort of like the Jews with their conceptualization of Ein and Ein Sof, which is the God before manifestation. And
Yeah,
the
you
Tao,
can't
it's
speak
like,
the name. And
right. And
so the original Jewish, that you can't speak of the name of God, is actually similar to like the Tao that can be spoken as not the Tao.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Very
Exactly.
much the same. Yeah.
So the Tao, as well as the Gautama Siddhartha Buddha stated, wisdom cannot be spoken. It's sort of like that same idea through the perennial philosophy.
Right.
But yeah. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah,
I think we're all in agreement on answering this question, regardless.
And it really, the question is hard because it just depends on your own idiosyncratic definition
of divinity.
Yeah.
Now, anyone can jump in on this one. It's somewhat obvious, but so being that there is this totality of being that can be to some degree quantified as divine or divine-like, is our relationship with that inevitable?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's what Peterson is trying to get at in the article too, with his question on inevitability. It's that whether or not the argument of God being real or unreal or true or untrue or knowable or not, this argument or this sort of discussion and debate has underpinned the foundation of all of humanity's forward progression through time and history. It's in our cultural constructs, it's in our architecture, it's in our art, it's in our language,
our legal systems and our government systems,
everywhere. So it's almost like that he's just getting at the idea of the question being absurd because it doesn't matter. We should be looking at sort of the practical application throughout time as it has created society today as we have it, and created our personal actual like mental cognitive hardware. You know what I mean? It's like the hardware we literally use, or the software, I suppose.
So since that is an inevitable relationship, then sort of the concluding thing of these underlying assumptions of the article is sort of two-part: is should we make the most of that inevitable relationship? And then sort of the trickier part of that question is, how do we make the most of that relationship?
Yeah, I want to hear from Jane almost on this one.
Yeah. Well, you're on the spot, but no pressure.
I mean, the should is obvious, but also I think it kind of relates back to like, you don't really have a choice. You're participating whether you're conscious of it or not.
Right.
Then the question is like, are the decisions that you're making in your life going to be propelling things towards a better direction or a worse one? Because that's to me where the complexity really comes in terms of understanding, like your actions have a very direct impact that ripple out much farther than you can conceptualize or may think like, oh, I'm just one person. And especially now that we're on the internet.
Yeah. Right. Indeed. It's kind of funny how philosophy,
Jane, complexity and probably determinism is a big part of your philosophy and how that you kind of put this together. And I know that's a big thing, and everyone should at least watch or listen to the podcast that you have on that. But can you kind of a bit summarize that idea and how it might apply to this complexity or the theory of complexity?
Yeah. So complexity theory is a study of complex adaptive systems, and those are any systems where you have a bunch of agents that are kind of autonomously making their own decisions, and those decisions produce emergent behavior that has kind of more intelligence than any of the system's constituent parts. So yeah, like that's the simplest definition of it, and then I can go into more detail if you want, but basically any system that you can think of is a complex system, like not something like a car or something where it's linear, but complex systems are interrelated. The causality is nonlinear.
Have you ever read Marvin Minsky's like The Society of Mind? Does that book name ring a bell to you? No? Okay, never mind. But that's cool. So essentially, yeah, it's just to go on that, it's just like systems emerging, or like complex singular agents emerging into systems, and then my question for you is, Isaac mentioned that you're a determinist, or
Yeah,
has
me
something
too.
to
That
do
was
with
my question
determinism.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah. What
Can
about
you
it?
can you distill that? Like, how does your conceptualization
Well-
of determinism play into, I guess, what you're attempting to accomplish by teaching and talking about complexity theory?
And also, just to add to that, are you like a hard determinist?
I guess so. Like I agree with Sam Harris's kind of understanding of determinism. To me, it seems obvious that like, yeah, of course, people aren't capable of making choices, but whatever choice you ultimately make is going to be the only choice you could have made given that same set of inputs. So people are deterministic in that sense. But then also I can relate to kind of standard conceptions of free will, where if you have a belief in your head, oh, I'm capable of making choices, that then impacts the type of choices that you will end up making. Like if you're lying in bed in the morning being like, oh, I'm so sleepy, I can't get up, then you're just going to keep lying there. But as soon as you're like, no, I'm going to get out of bed now, then you get up and out of bed. So your belief that you're able to act maybe in ways that are contrary to what your preference would be is what allows you to make more difficult decisions in life.
So it's almost like compatibilism a little bit, but you lean more towards deterministic functions in the world, but you accept the fact that there is room for deviation in some level. It's kind of like one of my friends, he wrote a book called The Bridge, and in it, his name's Thomas Braun. He talks, his conceptualization is he comes from corridors and way. So if you think of a timeline of events as hallways going left and right and corridors going forwards in time, it's sort of like you can choose to go left or you can choose to go right, but no matter what, you're sort of always forced to go down the corridor no matter what hallway you choose. It's like no matter
That's
you have all
interesting.
this.
You should listen to her first podcast because it uses a maze metaphor pretty well to start that
Perfect.
that type of thing. But yeah, go ahead.
Awesome. No, yeah, it was just that like you have an illusion of choice and like a feeling of free will that no matter what you do, you're still hard determined. But it's like that illusion of
Right.
directionality.
Right.
It still leads us to the same conclusions in the end of time. Is
Right.
sort of what you're getting at, Jane. Is that almost like what you're trying to talk?
Yeah, I'm not sure. And also just in terms of like ethics and morality, I think it's important to have an understanding of determinism in terms of empathy, right? Like understanding that other people are at whatever position they are in their life, it had to be that way and you can't really fault them. But then there's this weird thing, and I kind of like tying it into more Eastern like Buddhist philosophies or whatever, where like there is something kind of unique about the present where your decisions right now are free. And then it just becomes like, I think it's a reverse causality thing. So you're being forced in one direction, but the beliefs that you hold in your head are going to choose which direction you're spurred into. But then you need to have, if you want to have a successful society, and like an ethic of free will, if you want, like if everyone's going around thinking that they have free will in the sense that they do in terms of their ability to influence their actions, then that's how you get the best outcomes for everyone, while still turning and looking to their neighbor and being like, I'm not going to blame you for being the person you were yesterday. I can only ask you to be better tomorrow.
Yeah, so with your ethics, there's two parts that I want to say, and then I'm done. It's one is, in my personal opinion on the nature of free will, it goes outside the normal conversation. I feel like we actually literally do have free will moving forward in time, as if this moment to the next moment is novel and has never actually occurred before. Like that time is moving forward for the first time ever, but in some non-causal metaphysical like contradictory way, all time already exists, but it's so moving forwards in time is novel and we all have freedom to choose, but then like backwards in time is hard determined. It's a little bit of a weird conceptualization, but what you say, I resonate with that a lot. And it's just what you're getting at is you are a hard determinist. You do believe in the nature of things to always cause other things the way that they should have happened, but that's not an excuse for us to completely get rid of our moral compass. We should still strive to make the best reality that we can through an ethical moral philosophy, even if it's determined that that will happen. Is that where you're kind of at? Like you always are striving for the betterment, even if it's determined.
Yeah, well, and also your actions are playing the key role there, right? Like the interface between like Sam Harris and like Ben Shapiro or something. Ben's like, well, why would you do anything then if you think you're so deterministic? And it's like, no, because an action is still a choice. Right. So you have to make choices. It's a matter of how you're viewing your agency as playing a meaningful role in your capacity to choose. Because the more that you're like, oh, well, no, I'm stuck like this, the more you're going to be stuck like that. And that's, I think, how you get a slew of psychological issues too. The more you buy into that idea of like, I'm incapable of changing who I am or my behavior, then you're just in a downwards loop. And the more you can get yourself out of that, then you're producing more productive outcomes.
You kind of denigrated Judeo-Christian theology a little bit in the way that you understand them to understand their God as a personal God. But have you ever studied Maimonides ever?
No.
Have you ever? No. So I would, if I were you, I think you would heavily resonate with Maimonides. He's a famous Jewish figure who changed the course of the Jewish lifestyle forever. And even in philosophy courses in secular academia, Maimonides is studied because of his moral ethical philosophies. And it sounds so much like what you're espousing right now. So
Okay.
I would just check out Maimonides.
For sure.
Cool. Connor, what do you think?
What was the question again?
Well, okay, we kind of got into a couple of things. One is the this inevitability of the relationship of God, and I think part of why that we segued into this, in addition to just clarifying, what Jane had been thinking, is because it starts getting into ethics at that point. But go ahead.
Has to.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, to tie it full circle into like my own philosophy, I guess,
Sure.
is that I think that I agree with determinism to a certain extent. I think that all the systems that we ever thought were random turned out to not be random. But I think that the only place where we do find randomness is at the quantum level, which is where things get really weird, which is what kind of ties it back to my whole claim in the beginning, that I think that the mental sphere is actually like this real place that exists in the universe, that we just don't have the capacity to interact with it, other than through our mental spheres in very limited capacities. So that was just what I was going to say about the determinism aspect of it. But as far as, what was the other question you had, Isaac?
Oh, just I don't know if we're just the inevitability of our relationship with the totality of being and how that we can make the most of that.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that, I mean, I'll just reiterate what everybody else said, is that I think that whether or not we have free will or whether or not everything is determinist, I think it's better for the psychology of the individual to act as though you have free will and to make good choices upon that.
Jordan Peterson espouses that same idea.
Yeah, well, it's also
sure.
like Pascal's wager, right? Like if you are, I mean, but it doesn't have to be like one universe where God exists and one where God doesn't. It could just be one universe where everything is hard to determine and one universe where there's free will. I think it's better to act as though their free will exists.
Yeah. I'd expand upon that a little bit too, in that like it's not just a matter of is it this way or is it that way. It's factually, the more you act like you have agency over your actions, the better results you'll produce.
Right.
So it's directly tied into the fabric of reality in terms of your beliefs about your relationship to the world influence the world around you. It's not like you're choosing between one of two options. You're bound into it regardless.
Right. It's very as above, so below.
Yeah, it's highlighting values and then chasing those values as ideals and having morally correct, or at least like synchronistic values, and then making decisions through the free will such that we are led towards the reification of those things is what you're basically saying, that how we should be. And I think it's funny that all philosophical systems, eventually, because we're human beings, we are animals who live together amongst other animals, other individuals, through your complexity theory, kind of individual agents messing with other agents. No matter what philosophy or the question is, it always leads to morality and questions of ethics and how we should behave. And so to go back to Peterson's question, should we not make the best of it? I think absolutely yes, just in the same way that Jane just described why we should always seek the best outcomes. I agree with Jordan Peterson and in his hypothetical question that yes, we should always be seeking out to use this, regardless of whatever it is, to go towards a better state of novelty in which all things are more harmonious and succinct. So
yeah, and I would say kind of like the converse to that, which is kind of like the atheist nihilistic point, is kind of doing the same thing, and sort of unconsciously, like Jane mentioned, where if you say there's definitely not a God, or definitely not a totality of being, or you don't want anything to be of this nature of God or of this nature of divine, and then you're sort of like the nihilistic sort of cliff to fall off then is to like So therefore, nothing I do matters. And also, sort of,
Right.
if you're in this like hard deterministic, nothing I say or do or think matters, then it's like, what's the point? Da 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 da.
Sure.
But in so doing, that's having a relationship with the totality of being. You then have, it's just a
shitty one.
yeah, it's just
You're
a
pulling
shitty
things
one.
down.
It's an ignorant
Yeah.
one is all. It's one that has a lack of scope of awareness, I think,
Right.
to make a decision like that. But it's
just
okay.
very short-sighted.
Hierarchical systems have to exist in order for the correct ideal to exist. So we have to sort of embrace and integrate that sort of nihilistic approach to things, and we sort of have to like live and let live with it. It's sort of like the whole idea behind the union of opposites in the last episode that we did. We have to like kind of let it be and understand it and integrate it. But yeah. I agree with you, Isaac.
Go ahead.
And Jane, I would say that the fact that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say that the fact that you believe that the agents, which is, you know, the conscious beings, can interface with the determined systems kind of puts you in the category of soft determinism.
She's like a compatibilist kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I'm on my own brand of compatibilist.
Okay.
And the interesting thing about complexity theory too is that there's an understanding that there's the agents and then there's the emergent structures. But once the structures emerge, both are acting upon the other, and so you get that. That's what I mean about like you get two directional causality in terms of yeah.
It's called Ken Wilber, who is a philosopher that I highly regard as just amazing. Recommend everyone. He's currently alive today. He's a living, breathing man. But his integral philosophy and integral theory through his system called AQUAL, or all quadrant, all level, is a system of integral, like integrating multiple aspects of reality, in which he speaks on the nature of mankind or anything, causal agents, to be holons. Like, again, it's part wholes. And as things are emerging to more and more, I guess, like nuanced complexities, exactly as you said, once this emergent pattern becomes a thing, whether or not it's even aware of itself, there is a two-way causality in which the future affects the past and the past affects the future, and the lower affects the higher and the higher affects the lower. And it kind of goes back to Connor with the whole as above, so below.
Right.
And the idea that like ideas can have people too, in terms of like you can analyze history or social movements through like concepts and things that are entirely relational and devoid of the human agents that are acting within them. But
I mean, that's what a religion is. It's a bunch of people who kind of were possessed or inhabited by an idea that literally propelled them to create a codified and succinct ideology.
Is exactly what you were saying, Connor. It's exactly what you're getting at with your explaining of the mind space that we all interface with, that we have limited perspective of.
Exactly.
That's exactly what you're saying with that.
Right. It's just I'm trying not to portray it as something that's arbitrary or something that's you know.
We just did a book review, Jane, honestly, on our channel, talking about Stephen Pressfield's The War of Art, in which he kind of personifies ideas, and the question is, can ideas possess people? It's very, very interesting. If you've never read it, it's a good book. Self-help.
Very Jungian,
Okay, so I want to put a little twist on this, right? Which I don't know. Again, it might be
twisted tea.
Yeah, it might be almost a Jungian thing, because one of the ways that the Jungians look at this God concept or totality of being concept is a lot like energy, but in the fact that and it's almost like sometimes even a lot of religious people use like the wind metaphor. You can't see it, but you can see the effects. Breath. Yeah, same thing with energy. You can't see energy, but you can always see the effects of it on every level, atomic all the way up. But then, so if we accept that or at least interpret for even a moment that the totality of being is something like an energy or underlying energy that flows through reality, whether that's conscious or however we want to deal with it, or intelligent, or however we want to define intelligence, then what's interesting about the energy metaphor, it's just like, Jung talked about this a couple of times, is how that if you look into the atom, it changes the thing that's perceived and the perceiving thing, which is
the Heisenberg uncertainty principle.
Right. That's kind of what I was trying to talk about earlier, how I think like at the quantum level, that's where things kind of get metaphysical.
Right.
At least, you know, if you were going to reduce metaphysics in some way. And that's why I think that like, that's where that whole plane of existence is, that we can interface with, but only to a small degree. I know I keep saying that, but I
Yeah,
think it's
yeah.
worth
just trying to drive it
reiterating.
home.
Yeah.
So there's a whole new age sort of understanding in which it's sort of watered down, misunderstood, misinterpreted physics, where people are talking about the Heisenberg uncertainty principle
Yeah.
to the degree in which
Well,
simply looking at something or thinking about something changes the nature of that, because that's what the Heisenberg uncertainty principle is. For anyone that's listening who doesn't know, essentially it's the energy that goes into observing
Mhm.
the molecular or the quantum level of
Right.
reality, and then getting the graphs to show data that we interpret and analyze. The energy that went in to observe that process actually changed the behavior of the quantum state, such that you can never actually really peer into the natural order of things, because you're always, it's like when you're trying to like catch like an egg shell that you accidentally dropped into your egg that you cracked into a bowl. You're constantly pushing it away as you approach it.
Yeah.
That's a great metaphor.
Yeah, truly. And
I hate that.
so but a lot of people
Come
misinterpret
here, you
this.
little fucking eggshell.
Yeah, like, come here, man. Like, oh, no, this is so I can't catch it ever. Yeah, people seem to think of it as something that truth permeates all levels of reality, which isn't necessarily the case.
The eggshell
Right.
truth.
I don't think I agree with that. I think
Right,
your
like-
psychology acts as like a filter. You might see what you want to see, or
Well-
you might just be limited by your like limited senses.
Let me see if I can clarify where I was going with that and take it to another level that might help it make sense. Is one, that's kind of where I was going with, because it changes the thing and it changes the observer. That's part of that whole like inevitability of interaction with the thing, and because that is inevitable, we should be responsible with it and we should make the most of it, because that's going to transform both things. And I would say, again, this is a little bit Jungian psychology, but I think everybody understands the principles, or not everybody, but like educated people understand principles of like projection and persona and things like that.
Sure.
And that's where if we, so for right now, we are somewhat perceiving each other and somewhat, and other people are perceiving us and somewhat interacting with each other, obviously on some level. And in so doing, and our interaction with each other, that changes the what we are. So because I changed my understanding of you, and then I might behind your back then say BJ, Connor, Jane are great people, or I might say they're shitty people or whatever. But that interaction with them, I'm just giving.
I'm just a naked ape.
Well, not, but the interaction, even if it's just like a conversation, or like Rodney, we might be thinking of differently because he's not here, and then and that's fine. Or people that might be watching, we might be thinking of differently because they're just silent watchers. So and since we're talking about the totality of being, that principle goes into how we, and this is again sort of getting into Eastern philosophy or Eastern whatever, because in the East, especially India, they believe when you interact with someone, you're interacting with divinity, and you need to welcome people into your home, like you're welcoming a god into your home. So how that we interact with each other is,
you're saying,
brings about the
everything.
evolution or the growth of God in our consciousness.
Right. We're like the butterfly effect,
divine,
in which everything affects everything. And to bring up Kabbalah and Judaic mysticism, because it's something I'm very passionate about. Again, the concept is called Adam Kadmon. It's the primordial man. This idea is that like, or the Atman in Eastern, but it's even beyond that a little bit, because it's like, it's all Atmans, all higher selves, all supernal selves, like amalgamating into the body of Christ, or like not even Christ, because I don't believe in Christ, but the body of God, it's him or itself, in which all human lives and all human interactions across
like the totality
time and space,
of being.
The totality of being is the body of God. It's called Zer Anpin and Arich Anpin, the long face and the short face of God, and in Hebrew. And these concepts are exactly what you're saying in that jargon.
Right.
Again, it's arich anpin and zer anpin, in which like everything is everything and everything affects everything. So we should try our best to make the face of God look as like beautiful as possible, because it's up to us, given free agency and will by the Godhead, in order to produce God's self.
Mm.
The last thing I'll say on that is there's another great book called God's Debris by Douglas Adams. Not Douglas Adams, whoever the guy who wrote Dilbert is, the Dilbert
Okay.
comics.
Yeah, you mentioned that before.
Yeah, it's a book called God's Debris, in which God was so
Mm.
powerful and omnipotent that it's sort of like the can God create a rock that's heavier than God's self question. But God got so bored with knowing everything forever that God blew God's self up into oblivion,
Mm.
just to see if at the end of time God could bring itself back together and have a
He
good
was the
laugh.
original suicide bomber.
Yeah, like but he suicided himself in order
Yeah.
to like laugh at himself later that he did something that he didn't know that he could do, is sort of like the concept.
Mm.
But it's through the process of all things interacting with all other things towards this
Mhm.
emergent transcendental object at the end of time, to use Terence McKenna speak. It's like, and we should, what you're saying, Isaac, is we
Mhm.
should treat life this way, understand that it's frustrating, sort of like the Chinese finger trick. Like,
Mhm.
instead of pulling away from it and arguing it, we should embrace it and just chill. And
Yeah.
in the process of embracing it, we're trying to be our best, and we're trying to like do the best, sort of like what Jane talks about.
Right.
In such that we actually achieve greatness or like divinity in all things.
And there's a
Because-
certain optimism there too,
Yeah.
right? In
Right.
terms of like not feeling fearful about the world and feeling like the universe is something that's going to antagonize you rather
Right.
than being something that's your closest friend, I think is really compelling as well. Like
Mhm.
realizing that you're kind of operating in synchronicity with this larger thing,
Right.
but there's no malevolence there
Right.
that's inherent.
Exactly. Even when things are
Mm.
terrible, even when you're going through evil. And this is a huge concept in my first book, actually, in which this guy did this. He did a bunch of acid, and he realized. Well, I'm just gonna skip everything and just agree with that. It's just, long story short, yes,
Okay.
it's very optimistic. Even when like you're being murdered and pillaged and stolen from or dying from disease, it's all within this like divine or this sort of like determinism in which all reconciles in the end, right?
Well, that brings up an interesting point that I'd hope to get into at least a bit, is that, and I don't know how to put this in the form of a question, so maybe you can help with that. But my whole thing with the God argument, and I guess part of it is just that whatever it is, whether you say there's no God, whether you say that there is, this Eastern God, Western God, whatever, it's a leap of faith, so that kind of
Yeah.
can't be argued. And then also that it has to be like my leap of faith can't be your leap of faith. It has to be,
From an individual.
yeah, it has to be experienced.
Yes.
And that, but then again,
Isaac.
where it quickly gets into is the issue of ethics and evil. However, on that same note of faith, if you say that there is some transcendent being, whether you want to call it an Eastern version, Western version, the totality of being, or whatever else, that whatever that is God, even potentially or possibly, that being a potentially all-powerful, all-knowing, all whatever being, even if it's just like an energy, whatever, it's his or her or its own business what that is. In other words, we can't put
Right.
our morality on it.
Yeah.
If it
because it's
exists,
emergent.
right? If the
Because it's
totality of
wholly
being
other.
is anything that it is, it comes top down. It can't go bottom up, although we kind of figure it out
Well,
bottom up.
it does go top down and bottom up. Like it does.
Yeah,
Is the idea, at least.
it goes both ways, but in other words, like that's kind of like a lot of Sam Harris's argument, is the whole like,
It just boils down to perspective.
Yeah.
That's all. To like go back to Connor's meme space sort of idea, or like the Platonic idea of knowledge. It's like top down created you, right? Because you
Yes,
don't have a recollection
exactly.
of how your body came to be, why
Right.
it's so perfectly in order to work
Right.
properly, and you're not just like exploding or imploding into infinite nothingness
Right.
and void at any moment. Like you're a consistent conscious entity. And so
Right.
there are these processes that mold you, that you partook in before your conscious awareness was even aware of yourself as a human being. So what you're getting at a little bit is sort of I guess the question is, how do we develop moral, like what is the ultimate question though? Is it like a why, how, or a what?
Well,
Like
I guess what I'm getting at is just the fact that, and again, it's tricky to even put in a question, or just if people can accept this premise that
Sure.
that whatever that we say that God is, if it, and we have to say that there is at least a possibility,
Okay.
maybe not. I mean, I guess some people can say no, it's impossible, or maybe they say
Whatever.
there's
So
not the evidence of it. But if there is that possibility, then that possible thing can be just about anything, and it can do its ethics however it wants,
yes.
including like
Okay.
as much as like it sucks that people are like starving and having civil wars and rigging elections and
You'll
whatever
never know
else.
it. What you're getting at is you'll never know it. Like
Well,
you have to be humble and have faith, right?
well,
It is sort of-
even if you know it, we can't say, oh, because we decided rape is bad and rape
Right.
exists, that means X. Where
Right.
in fact, sure, we can agree rape is bad, but perhaps in some grand picture
Yes.
of,
That's the
of what
acid.
ethics
I mean,
really
yeah.
are.
Okay. The whole
that-
reason why I brought up the acid trip
yeah.
is because the guy was
Okay.
tripping and looked at a tapestry and
Yeah.
literally saw all this evil shit happening and all this
Right.
good shit happening. And looking at the minutia of what was occurring on the tapestry,
Right.
it was like this awful scene of human history and just this gross, debased activity that humans are taking place in. And then his perspective sort of panned out, and the tapestry was like an image of this god, the Shiva like
Sure.
looking godhead that was just like laughing, and he started laughing, and he realized that
Right.
in wrestling so heavily to try to understand something, this finite mind thinking so arrogantly that it can contain the infinite, in thinking that you know the truth or any semblance of truth is a joke, because it's so much bigger and more superordinate than you. And
yeah.
you have to have this like faith and humility. And that's why I kind of laughed when you started bringing it up, because it's a huge aspect of my first book again, which is called the cosmos we live in is a frustrating cosmos, and you have to treat it like the Chinese finger trick, because systems go outside of systems to reference their own systems. Nothing can actually know anything else of its own accord. Everything requires something else in a dualistic fashion for any definition to be interfaced
Right.
with.
That's what I was going to say, to expound upon your tapestry idea, is that consciousness itself, or at least like human consciousness that we have the capacity for, is literally predicated on contrast. Like you really wouldn't know what good is if you didn't have evil to compare it to. So you kind of have to appreciate that if you appreciate reality for what it is.
And you can never escape it, and it's frustrating. So, and at the bottom line, in my opinion, of the nature of reality, to go back to the whole faith concept, is no matter what we do, any logical argument that we make, any forward direction of thinking comes from a place of faith first.
Okay, so I'm going to push back here because you guys keep on bringing up faith, and that's where I probably most staunchly disagree with you.
Okay, go.
Oh yeah, go ahead, please.
I think you can have a completely comprehensive view of the world, and especially of metaphysics that isn't predicated on faith whatsoever.
Well, let's talk about it.
And I think I view things as being a lot more bottom up and emergent rather than anything being top down, which is probably where there's the biggest disagreement in terms of the conception.
Can you tell me what you think faith is, like in your own lexicon?
And then I have two questions.
Faith would be holding a belief without evidence.
Okay.
So I don't know if I agree with that definition, but go ahead, BJ.
So I mean that is ultimately like probably the dictionary definition of faith. But when I use the term faith in this sort of first principles, first premises, moving forward through like a process of logic, I view the world as wholly other than myself. That like I am part of the world and the world is part of me, but like my perspective of it is separated from everything else, such that in order for me to interface with anything, sort of like Kantian metaphysics, I'll never know things in and of themselves. I will only know my particular representation of those things. Very Kantian, very like Schopenhauer-esque. And because of that, because I'll never know the thing in and of itself, I will only know my representation in my mental sphere of that thing. I have to make assumptions on the nature of my own cognitive process as I interface with that thing, such that when I make the axiomatic presuppositions, I then can move forward through a knowledge in which I can reproduce events, I can reproduce experiments, I can find truth, quote unquote, because something happens over and over and over, and these are objective realities that I'm interfacing with. But ultimately, at the end of everything, it boils down in the most simple fundamental building block of faith, because, and this is how I use the term, because again, there is no way to quantify that what you're actually experiencing is not a complete illusion that's created by your own
Yeah.
central perception.
Well, and we have no reason to think anything else, because like that was the metaphor I was trying to drive home with the dog not being able to see color, but the dog doesn't know what it's missing because its biology doesn't have the capacity for it.
Yeah.
But even in the quantifiable universe that we can see and that's tangible around us, even in that domain, there's an infinite amount of data that our biologies just don't have the capacity for.
Well, I agree that our Sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, I want to hear more from Jane's pushback on the faith thing.
I'll just end it on this. And because there's that infinite data all around us, it forces us to make some beliefs based on faith, because we have no choice.
So I agree that our epistemology is limited, but I think that like metaphysics is objective, and I think that you can use rationalism as a way of approximating an objective metaphysic without having a complete a comprehensive epistemology to understand the world.
So, but if there's not a comprehensive epistemology to truly understand it as it is, you have to operate on some degree of, and this is where I use the term faith, but you don't have to use faith, I guess. The reason why I use faith is because you don't truly know the thing. You know the representation of the thing, such that it actually has like practical utility. So you can use it and it's real and you can call it true. But ultimately, when you discuss the nature of what is true, you can never actually know it as an individual agent existing within a system of complex emergent patterns. That's the first thing that I kind of wanted to say on that. And the second thing is you said as well, Jane, that you feel more as if things are bottom up than top down. My question for you is, how do you reconcile? You have said things go both ways. But if you feel more so that things work from the bottom up, how was it at all that anything came to be whatsoever in manifestation if there wasn't more so of a top-down process? Like,
so things can happen from a bottom-up processing, but then there's also attractor states that exist on the opposite end. So that's how you get the two-directional causality. Is you can have things that are like in any complex system, there are certain things that are going to pull towards. If you're thinking about like the evolution of plants or animals or something, it's like, well, all animals have eyes and mouths kind of close together, so maybe there's a good reason for that. And then you could say, well, that's an attractor state where clearly there's some utility around this pairing. Even if you can't maybe objectively prove that scientifically, there's still some cosmic metaphysical reason. Although I'd argue you probably can make a pretty compelling argument as to why your eyes are close to your mouth and not any living being or something.
So I guess there's a lot of like gray area when we talk about anything that's here and now, for sure, that you can make arguments either direction for, like in your example of evolution and the way faces are shaped and how these things emerge. It might not necessarily be that there's some cognitive mind that exists outside of the structure that made this happen. It's almost like the earlier, more simple systems giving rise to the complex systems through almost like the path of least resistance or whatever.
Yes, that's exactly what I believe. Like when you blow a bubble, it's always going to be a round sphere, and there's it's all about efficiency within that. Yeah, surface tension and stuff like that.
But then there's arguments that nature is terribly inefficient, right? And so like evolution itself is terribly inefficient. So then we can get lost in that whole discussion. But I guess my question for you is from the first principle, from like the first anything that was as simple could be before there was a top-down process. If there is, like, I guess, what is your idea, what is your conceptualization of time before time? Do you have one? Do you feel as if there is any utility in speaking about, because this is the nature of God to so many of these cultures, East and West, even the Jews, it's just highly misunderstood that God, it does exist outside of the system of reality itself. Like, what do you think on that? What is your opinion?
In terms of, if you want to describe God as being like the kind of causal energy that permeates through everything, then I can buy into that wholeheartedly. I'm trying to think of
so on that.
Yeah.
On that, if you agree with that, then would you also agree that God is quote unquote up from this down of simplicity? Like God isn't up or down, but like, I suppose, would that be your answer, that it's wholly
I think I'd see it as the energy that's pulling things. There's this quote that I found on Twitter, which was so amazing. And it was somebody describing like something somebody had posted on a message board in like the early like days of the internet, talking about how like, oh, if evolution is real or true, then, and there's like this energy that's kind of causing all these things to change. Like, I think we'd notice that. And I think, isn't that the most beautiful thing in the world? Like, yeah, of course, that's what everything that we're experiencing is like this energy that's pulling us through. And so to me, that's like the closest that I'd agree with in terms of an approximation of the divine or something.
Do you agree that? Yeah. So go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm thinking of, you guys know Conway's Game of Life?
No, actually.
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay. So
Educated.
these are like little computer programs that this guy made, where you can kind of put in really, really simple rules where you'd think that, and then have them play out in a system, and you'd think that because
Oh,
they're simple
yeah.
rules, it would be like, not that interesting. But then actually, the more that the rules kind of pattern out and interact with one another, you get these really complex, interesting dynamics that look
Yeah.
like something a lot more that there would be something bigger at play that's causing all these
Right.
things to unfold. So that's kind of my approach. Is I see like whatever you want to describe as the Big Bang or the beginning of the
So-
universe. It's like there's rules that came from somewhere. If you want to call that God, that's fine. And then that ripples
Sure.
out, and we have all these experiences.
I know what you're talking about now. I saw something on YouTube about this. I'm glad that you bring this metaphor up, because the idea that I have, I think that a lot of the argumentation can be, I guess, like, what's the word, reconciled, is when they computerized that, when they ran that program, you're looking at images on screen which are created from like bytes of data, which are created from electrical pulses on a motherboard, which they're like the actual reality of what's occurring to create this illusion on screen where all of this computation is happening and then reflecting things that we're observing and making value judgments about the nature of reality. It's like that is so wholly alien from how you're interpreting it and representing it on screen, that if you're doing it completely in screen speak or within the domain of reference of screen world, it could never ever quantify or even understand that it is being created by these wholly other processes in like some weird chasm of reality that's so far away from screen world in like motherboard world, where it has no idea, but they're integrating into each other, and they require each other,
Well,
such that
let
screen
me
world
just
can
put
actually
top
happen.
down, bottom up in this term. Is
That's
just that,
top down for me.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
that's the
Well,
idea.
and sort of the same concept, which I think Jane was also getting at, was just that the totality of being top down, not necessarily like white man and this white bearded guy in the sky top down, but top
That's
down.
what I mean. That's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
For.
So top down in terms of, we have our thoughts and our biology and the way that our brains are laid out and everything else because of millions and possibly billions of years of what has led us to this point.
Sure.
And also going in a certain direction that we have kind of decided to go, to whatever degree that we can say that we've decided, but going in a certain direction and interconnected with everything else, then there's gonna
like a
always
gravity.
be, there's always gonna be both, that sort of like interplay of back and forth, individuals trying to interact sort of like a bottom up, but then
The
it
whole
seems
trying
it seems
to
like
also
there's
hold
going to be
the individual
more
together.
of the top down. But I'm wondering what Jane thinks of that perspective.
I think I'd put them on equal footing, where you need the rules to kind of set everything into motion, but then
Right.
also then there's that pull, or there's attractors where the causality is going both ways. Like I think the bubble is quite a beautiful metaphor, just in terms of like that idea of that's the totality, right? The thing that comes out at the end. But unless you're blowing in at the beginning, so is God the breath, or is God the bubble?
Exactly.
So
it's sort of like it's like time loops upon itself in a Mobius strip, and things aren't causal, and you can't. That's, I guess, my question. That's the frustrating question that I'm trying to get at is, in your opinion, have you ever thought much about that process? How do you feel about this, like, chicken came before the egg came before the chicken, sort of like cliche? And how do you interpret in with your interpretation? How do you accept or deny that in your particular philosophical system? That's what I'm trying to ask.
How do I feel about the chicken and the egg issue? Or
Yeah, it's like, so like what you're talking about is top down, bottom up, but bottom up is almost like more fundamental, as we give rise to emergent patterns which then pull the bottom. Like you admit that they need each other, but you feel as if there's a directionality to the cosmos, which I agree with. But my question is more from like first causes. My question is sort of like Socrates' unmoved mover. It's sort of like, how in the hell did any of this start? If like, did it start from the bottom and then go up? Did it start from the top calling the bottom up? Like, in your philosophical system, have you quantified this or like described this process?
it seems like an unanswerable question to me.
Yes.
So then I do just default towards it's
What
both
is?
on equal foot. It's both on equal footing. But then also in terms of our lives, clearly, because you are the agent acting, you have to be interpreting yourself as bottom up, which I know isn't really the question you're asking, but from a psychological point of view, then that's maybe why I prefer bottom up thinking. And in complexity in general, it's always concerned with like you have to start with some little interaction
Something.
that's occurring,
Yeah.
and then you have the emergent
It's
behavior.
pragmatic. It's very
Yeah.
pragmatic. So I guess you did answer my question. It's like, it doesn't matter. That your answer is my question is absurd. Just like Jordan Peterson says that the question of whether or not God is real or not is absurd, because you take it towards a sort of like a methodology that is very concerned with practicality and morality and how we can actually become more complex from, like, you don't even care about that question.
Yes,
almost.
in terms
Doesn't
of like,
matter.
I also hate when people start up conversations being like, well, what if we're in a simulation, or like, what if you're
Sure.
dreaming right now? It's like, okay, that's a fun little thought experiment, but I'm not going to waste any time worrying about that if there's not some little clue in my life that that's something to spend any time thinking about.
I understand your position now and respect it. The only
Yeah.
reason why I ask it is because in certain metaphysical schools of thought and practices and, you know, major world religious institutions, that unanswerable question, the wrestling with that unanswerable question and not just giving up to be in what is here, what is actually observable, is the answer. But like, you can never get it by, it's like the koan, the Zen koan, right? Are you familiar with what a koan is? It's exactly that. So I was just asking your opinions to see if you have wrestled with it too much, but it sounds,
Let me
and
ask.
I'm not downplaying that you haven't. I was just curious as to if you had.
Let me ask another absurd question, but it's that, okay, if we assume that there is a God, and or at least that there can appear to be God, whatever that we might assume that totality of being to be, and that it might be interpreted different ways, people would probably screw that up. So
Sure.
let's think of in terms of, because it's screwed up, we shouldn't take part in ideologies, but whatever God is or isn't must be experienced on the individual level.
Yes.
So maybe it's an absurd question, but can we agree that the problem that people on all sides of these arguments have is more of a problem with the ideology?
Yes, for sure. For sure. Always that. Because ultimately, as we discussed earlier, duality is the only real important construct that gives life to all things. And so like, individualism requires this higher ordinance, and this higher ordinance almost requires an individual to escape into, and just like Gödel's theorems, in order to perpetuate its own totality, and then its own individualism. So there's always this war and this balance no matter what. And I think that it's just a fact of the nature of the hiding of the totality in the individual in order to perpetuate itself, that it corrupts itself such that we make mistakes. And that's sort of like the fall from Eden. That's sort of like Adam and
another
Eve.
sort of similar, maybe absurd question is that, on that note, the experience must be experienced personally through the transcendent, not typical sense data. And
that's more what I was getting at with my questions with Jane. Ultimately.
So I'm wondering what you think of that, Jane, as far as whatever that God could be or could be interpreted as, whether that's called totality of being or maybe something different in the East or West or whatever. Is that something that primarily we have to see the effects of it and not experience it through like typical sense data?
Oh, I know. I think you can feel it through sense data all the time. Like, I think that's what meditation is, right? Like, I think there's really something really wonderful about just kind of sitting and being an experience where it's a very spiritual practice, right?
Yes.
I actually do like that perspective, but I guess what I'm getting at is that what you experience in meditation is something like that, something that can even feel divine or feel like you've experienced God. But it's not like you can point your finger and be like, look, I saw that. Maybe you had like a vision in some type of meditation, or you can't say I heard that. Maybe you heard a voice, but not the typical vibration of the eardrums. You can't say I felt that, although there might have been like some goosebumps or something like that. And so that's why I guess I use the word typical sense data, because I guess it would be like atypical sense data if you experience it through some type of like deep prayer state or deep meditation state.
Yeah. Back to the duality concept, that's kind of what I was getting at with like the totality, the divine requires an individual such that it can perpetuate itself, because in this infinite chasm of all things, there's no there's no difference, there's no shading of anything. It's just this I amness, this like beingness, this capital B being, and that is it. There's no differentiation, there's no self-awareness, there's no meta process. And until we sort of like fall out of Eden and like fall into this like lower state or whatever, if you want to call it higher or lower, is then what defines that totality. The totality is literally defined by its antithesis through this dual process, which is the supernal triangle and is the original anything. It is the Trinity, it is the Pythagorean triangle, it is Brahma, Shiva, Vishnu, this sort of like balancing act between two things. So that's how I would answer that question, is like, you'll never, like as an individual, you can always reach toward that ideal, but you can never achieve it. And God self like requires individuals
what do
to
you
be
think?
lost in order for heaven to exist.
Hey, I was just having fun being a spectator, man.
Yeah, no more of that. You little observer.
What's the question?
It's complicated.
It's just that whatever that
simple.
we say that God is, it has to be experienced through atypical data, and at least in terms of not sense data. And but
I don't think I agree with that. Just
Okay.
saying,
Yeah,
continue.
I don't agree with that either. I don't think. But go ahead.
I think God is your experience of being, right?
yeah,
It's
Okay, so
God is like
you can go back
emanated.
to like one of the I mean I say this a lot, but one of the etymologies I like of the word religion is it's something like respect for the sacred. So like literally like you can think of like the institutions of religion or whatever, but to me religion is like a lens that you look through reality through to see God everywhere. And so I do think that there's atypical sense data for God, which is like you're saying meditation or pharmacological bombardment or what have you. But I also think that it's both.
Well,
And
also, sorry.
You're good. Go ahead.
You go
I'm
ahead.
talking a lot.
So maybe, and I want to hear from Jane, but I guess maybe it's a different and maybe more personal interpretation
be.
of
It
the
must be.
data.
Well,
But
yeah, I mean, I've already made clear. I think that
Yeah.
I think that there are some things that we can interface with that are beyond like tangible, quantifiable reality, and I think that that's atypical data,
Right.
at least in comparison to what our biologies generally have the capacity for, which is
Right.
focusing on that which is pragmatic.
Esotericism 101.
I feel like
Truly.
meditation and psychedelics, what they do really good at is they turn off the filters, so you can
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say. Is when you take psychedelics, it's disinhibiting things that are normally inhibiting your sensory experience. So you're having a more attuned experience when you're on psychedelics.
Which goes back to Connor's sort of, again, meme space, like infinite consciousness is this crazy soup of stuff that just cannot quantify itself without something other. So then we do this weird top-down emergent, like reverse emergent process, reverse causality, in which simple things start to build themselves up that God can almost like escape into. So that way there can be this balance, and we have these individual experiences such that literally like you uphold all of reality on your back.
But I want to hear a bit more from how Jane says that our experience with the totality of being is through, would you say it's through typical sense data or typical data and atypical? Is it like a mix, and is it like a personal interpretation of that, or how do you quantify that, Jane?
Yeah, I think it's both, because to me there's something like there's lots of spiritual practice and just going through your day-to-day life in a way that has integrity to it.
Right.
Top wood carry water.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's but it would have to be, I guess maybe what I'm getting at, and where
it's like divinity is everywhere and nowhere.
Yeah, but
so
but
like,
moo.
Yeah, moo. I guess it's that nobody can tell anybody what God is.
Right.
They have to, whatever it is, even if we just call the totality of being energy, east, west, whatever, they have to figure that out for themselves.
Yes.
So
yes. It's frustrating.
Yeah.
Thank you, Isaac, for saying that aloud.
But the reason that is because that's what makes us more, that experience makes us more like divine. If we didn't have that experience, like it was just like laid upon us, just like our regular sort of everyday being, then it wouldn't, that experience is what
you're touching on, an
more
archetype.
Divinity.
Like the art, like if all things exist on all levels, which I feel like they do, there's an archetype, or like a thing that exists on all layers of reality, and divinity is one of those things, and it manifests in physical reality as brains that limit us to having to have individual experiences of this mystery so that way we can then be more like the mysteries themselves.
But
through
Jane,
the
how would
act.
you verbalize that? Or
Sorry, what's the question?
Oh, I guess I'm just trying to get a better take on your how that. Okay, so we experience the totality of being, or whatever that divinity may be or interpreted as, through our typical, potentially day-to-day life sense data, and perhaps some untypical, like we might have through meditation or deep prayer states or visions or voices that don't go through the vibrations of the eardrums. But it seems that, like I said, we can't, like, I can't tell you what God is, and you can't tell me what God is, and nobody can. Whatever that we come to our understanding as has to really come through experience. So
Through gnosis.
yeah, so how would you quantify that, or your position on
How do you feel about it?
How does that make you feel?
I feel good about it.
you feel good about it?
I think also, to me, the reason complexity is so important for my philosophy is that
Yeah.
once you understand that there are these relational dynamics that are innate in everything and they're operating on every single level, then that kind of really empowers you as an actor.
Right.
So I think without that, it's a lot easier to be much more nihilistic about things.
Yes.
And then once you understand, like, because complexity is like a meta science essentially. So, which is why I'm against, like earlier we were talking about faith. To me, it seems like, well, it's not a matter of faith because you can quite objectively kind of understand, well, no, there is a logic to these things and there is relationships, and you're a part of that manifestation.
So,
Right.
but yeah, and you kind of you said kind of understand though, and it seems like I like the tractor idea, by the way. I kind of felt like it reiterates what BJ was just talking about. But do you agree that like all philosophical perspectives do require a certain level of faith, considering that we're limited by our biology and our psychology, and
that's all.
Mine
just
doesn't.
that are well,
Wait, what do you mean?
But let
but
me
the
see if I can
question-
clarify
but
that
what-
real
but
quick. I
the-
think so Jane, I think that your philosophy, it is a good complete philosophy that you're putting together, and you put it out on a podcast and all that stuff. And
it's still a
great.
representation though. It's not like you're quantifying every aspect to say like and like omniscient to the point where you can see through all that which permeates through to like really come up with the like really bring it down and reduce it to the math. So in a certain sense, you are using a little bit of faith.
Jane,
So-
would you say that you're a scientific materialist?
I'm not sure. I feel like it
I don't
depends on
think
your
so.
definition.
Okay. Well,
don't
okay,
think so,
but I
just
guess
from
what
what
I'm
you
getting
said
at is
tonight.
that this is where people in that realm, and perhaps in a related realm like you're in, are that I think where they're often going, and perhaps you are, is that we can understand everything, but we don't yet. And so
We don't
we're
have the
getting
map.
there, and maybe we will, whether that's in 10 years or 100 years or 1,000 years or whatever the case. It is all understandable. But I guess clarify if how you're on that position, then I guess sort of like the follow up with that is, doesn't it seem like that is something like faith, to live and operate our philosophies until we get to that point?
Good point.
And that would be also a faith claim that maybe we'll know everything, but maybe we won't. So I don't know, where
It's a
are
really
you
good
on
point.
that?
Good point.
I guess I'm not too interested in omniscience. To me, it's more just a matter of being able to make logical sense of the world around you in a way that is consistent.
Sure, and I think
So-
we can at least try to do that. But I mean,
No, and we can.
right?
And we
I think
can.
that's good. You know,
That's trick. The thing about that is almost, and this was the whole thing that we got into when I had some of these discussions last year, was that sounds a lot like Peterson's Darwinian pragmatism, that we can know enough.
So the way that Jane just described the nature of things, and the way that you kind of did, Isaac, is sort of like some people would call it like mistaking the map for the territory. That like we can, within this system that we exist within, with where these limitations exist, Jane, I agree with 100%. Like there are logical processes, we can quantify things, we can know things as true, and knowing how things permeate on all levels of reality. I call them archetypes, not to mistake them with the Jungian concept of archetype. They're like skewers, and like every layer of reality is just like different food items, and there are certain hard concepts and like things that
It's like an
permeate every
axis
level.
that goes through the levels.
Everything exists on this axis and has different like types of manifestations on all the different layers and levels. But this whole concept, like what you're asking, Isaac, is what frustrates me the most, and why I also say that we operate from a layer fundamentally of faith in all things, is because Jane doesn't, and correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't enjoy playing in that realm of unknowable. Jane plays in the realm of what's known through these theories of complexity because they work and they're real. But where we're almost asking questions about is in this domain that's ethereal, that sort of isn't even tangible to the degree that you can use it in any practical way. So we shouldn't waste our time thinking about these things. But it's that in and of itself that I feel as if we act from a place of faith when we make these claims to reality through our systems here that work within these limiting binders.
Yeah,
Because
this is like a tricky whole other subject on the issue of if faith is a thing or not. But I don't know, what do you say about that, Jane, as far as so I guess your position is just, and that's why I was thinking it's almost like that the Jordan Peterson what is it called, Darwinian pragmatism. Is it something like that where it's like knowledge enough is all the knowledge needed? Is that kind of your position on the lack of faith?
I think I'm spiritually open-minded for sure, right? Like, because I do believe in emergence. So it's like, yeah, they're like my experience stops at me, but then of course I can understand that there's ideas that exist superordinate to that. And then you can go up and say, yeah, there's some top level where everything's encompassed. And like, sure, that's fine. I'm open. I don't know what happens when I die, you know, like I don't care. I'm spiritually open-minded to anything. But in terms of day-to-day experience, I'm not. Most of the time I'd rather just kind of be confronting reality as I perceive it. Yeah. Although, like, you know, then you can have a really great experience on psychedelics or something. And like, I can't wait until that can get more research funded into it and stuff like that too, in terms of, well, what is going on here? Maybe there's some data we can harvest. But also I'd say that in terms of what you guys seem to be describing, there wouldn't be any reason to kind of be open-minded to these higher order ideas if people weren't having experiences with them. So there is still an empirical level that's operating, because if you were just exactly, you can't understand the whole thing. But it's just like, if you are thinking, oh, maybe I'm in a simulation, unless you're seeing some little glitch in the matrix, you're not going to assume that.
So it's funny that you bring that up, because that's the whole purpose of what, like, my original question to you forever ago that sort of went on mega tangents is, it's like that old cliche. It's like, hey, look at this picture of the blue sky. And if I point at it and I say, hey, what color is this? And you say, oh, that's blue. And then I'm like, yeah, that's blue for me too. But there's no way that we can quantify that what I'm actually seeing and experiencing from an individual perspective. And this kind of goes to what Isaac's trying to ask, is I can never verify that my blue is your blue. I just know through this like tangible evidence in the world that this particular thing I'm calling blue,
that we understand blue the same way, because in a way that the sky is not blue.
but not necessarily though. So there's a lot of linguistic philosophers out there who talk about the nature of language and how we perceive the world through language, and how that actually acts
blue is always the last color to come into any language.
Well, it's just my blue and your blue pragmatically work, and we can use them in our systems, but I can never know through experience that your blue is my blue. And,
I guess I have a sort of impatience for those questions.
No, it's a cliche.
I feel that.
It is frustrating, and it leads almost to nothing practical. But that's the question that I'm asking, which is that everything is on some level of faith, even though it works. Like, you have to have.
This is
because to me, you don't need faith, because your experiences, so long as they're both going, yeah, that's blue, until there's something that comes in that makes me question the reality. To me, asking those questions seems like a waste of time.
So it's very of the Enlightenment era. It's very modern thought. It's very like Descartes or even like Hume, like to say, okay, that's the nature of an axiom or a presupposition, is that things are as they are, and we don't have to, like, we're not making assumptions. We just take it at face value, and then we move forward with our logical process. But there's this like postmodern thing where it's almost as if, and it's very Kantian too, again, because we can't verify the real nature of that thing. We only have a representation of that thing. Yes, it's almost inevitable, like we can never figure it out, so it's almost a waste of time. But having that conversation allows us to at least admit that, at least in my lexicon, that's how I use faith. I just wanted to like really explain it so that there's not any, because you brought it up again. So I just really wanted to.
That's like a whole other podcast. Is this faith issue?
But we're talking about God. It's close enough.
It all goes together.
All good. Another question that I wanted to get into real quick, if we can, is, and again, I think this is one that Jane might be able to shed some light on, is we've talked a bit about the utility of this, making the most of this inevitable relationship, or the utility of having a relationship with this inevitable divinity. But is there a utility in denying such a relationship versus embracing it? So, Jane, can you see any utility in denying such a relationship? And we don't want to. We're not trying to gang up on you. It's just
That's okay.
trying to get
I don't
diverse
mind.
opinions. But go ahead. Is there a utility you could see in maybe denying such a relationship?
Again, I feel like that goes back to semantics in terms of,
Mm,
I think there's absolutely historically lots of utility in objecting to notions of religion that are super prescriptive, right? I don't think there's any use there much more often than not. Like there might be some good ideas there, but fundamentally, I don't think you
I'm
need
sorry.
them.
You think religion historically was inherently bad? I'm sorry, I just didn't understand.
I feel like maybe it's too hard to kind of split hairs around, right?
Mhm.
Like there's a lot of entanglement going on, right? So I'm not going to say in one way or the other. But definitely nowadays, like I'm not interested in modes of thought that tell you, oh, you have to act a certain way because it was written in a book or something like that. It's like if there's a good logic to it, then the logic will persevere, which is kind of what Peterson does with all of his biblical lectures. It's like he's unpacking, well, what's actually going on in this story that makes it valuable. And then I side with Sam Harris in terms of like, well, then just talk about the value. Don't be analyzing the soup recipe, talking about the different grains of salt or whatever.
The only problem I have with that is that so much of our conscious power is unconscious, and like our entire right brain is really predicated on the idea of abstraction and narrative. So we actually kind of like think about it like this. If I told you that stealing is bad, it's not going to drive home as much as if I tell you a story where a person gets their hands
Oh,
cut
sure.
off 'cause
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
steal it, you know?
But that's chasing the value though. Like Jane's talking about sort of like how JP and Sam Harris kind of amalgamate to look at values instead of the flavors in which these stories come about.
I'm saying is the values by themselves aren't compelling.
You're saying that you almost can't speak value without narrative, is what you're saying.
There's a logic to the narrative.
You can.
Yeah.
Of course there's a logic to the narrative, but the narrative drives home harder. That's why we watch superhero movies, and we don't even know why we like them. We just do because they speak to something in us that like it's embedded.
Yeah,
sure. And that you can logically explain those things too, right? In terms of if you're understanding things on an emotional or an intellectual level, it can operate on both levels and be persuasive on both levels of analysis simultaneously.
And my whole thing on this, and I think it's a big thing that this is where I disagree with atheists like Sam Harris the most. In particular, him that's like, we need to get rid of all religion, whatever. We need to get rid of it.
Destruction.
And when I read his book and I really tried to get his point of view from the moral landscape and everything, it just seems like all reductive.
It is. It is.
Yeah, I didn't like the moral landscape at all. He didn't make arguments that I was anticipating he'd make.
I thought there'd be a lot better, and I didn't even get more out of it than I got from those debates or discussions that they had.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But we have to admit, throughout all of our history known back, there has been some sort of religion, and that we have that something like that we can all experience on a personal level. And because of that, and just the nature of what we can perceive through statistical data, there will probably, at least for the foreseeable future, at least 100 or 1,000 years, be religion. And because that's the case, I feel like, okay, Jane might push back on that.
Keep going, yeah.
But I was going to say, because that's the case, that there will probably be some kind of religion for the foreseeable future, it's more valuable then to, rather than say, let's throw it out,
integrate them.
It's more valuable to say, okay, what values can we get from these stories and these metaphors and everything? And what that does that's more valuable too is, rather than, getting whether it's East, West, or it's whoever,
Harry Potter,
or whatever,
Potter, doesn't even matter. The Lion King.
Star Wars.
What that it does is that it shows that value, and it doesn't cause these repressions, because if you tell whether it's fundamentalist Christians or it is Muslims or whoever else, you're like, we got to get rid of you, we got to get rid of it. if instead of that approach, you're like, okay, here's all the values that we can all sort of like agree in like a humanistic sort of approach. Let's enhance those. And these other ones that are like for violence and misogyny or whatever else, let's try to see if we can tamper those down.
Yeah, you can integrate
the
those.
only
So there's two things.
And the only thing I would add to that is that even if you don't think there's anything worth extrapolating through religion, you know, I can already tell what BJ is about to say. It's that part of integral philosophy is just kind of like you live and let live. Like you realize that like ideas that don't resonate with you are better off being added to the pot, even if
because they define you, because they give definition.
Yeah,
they give definition to your point and your purpose, and that is a value in and of itself. So there's two things that I wanted to say on that is, and that's where Karl Popper's paradox of tolerance comes in, that I espouse like all the time. And there's two books that I wanted to reference. One is The Archetypal Cosmos. Isaac, everything you're talking about is the archetypal cosmos. You should read that book. It's by Kieran LeGrice. It's really good. It's about like looking backwards and like looking at a mythological standpoint and trying to unify mythology with logical process, and sort of wanting to get rid of narrative, but sort of like stripping the old narratives of values and looking at the values and then integrating them into the future. And it's very Terence McKenna-esque, in which he talks about the archaic revival and his ideas of, you know, the psychedelic shamanism revival coming back into modern days. Yeah, we should never, integral philosophy 101, which we espouse on our channel all the time, is you can never ascend or evolve to a spiritual place of betterment or you know, a higher standpoint by disintegrating or by destroying your opposition. You must integrate with that opposition in order to transcend.
Right.
I
And
absolutely agree with that.
And I want to hear what Jane's opinion on this, because she is what, I don't know what the word is but you believe a lot of what Sam Harris puts forth, but that's like my biggest gripe with him.
she's like a logician, sort of.
Yeah,
almost a materialist, but not.
Yeah, well, but I mean, I have wanted to discuss with someone who, you know, believes in most of what Sam Harris says, and I tried that a couple of times last year and didn't really go anywhere. But that's I think my biggest gripe is the whole like throw it all out, where I would say,
yeah, I completely don't agree with that. I don't know if that I maybe you heard Sam say something I haven't. I don't know if that's really what he thinks in terms of like, I think he absolutely would agree with like live and let live. The question is, when is your religion compelling you to do things which are patently ridiculous and non-productive for anybody, right? Which is where he's paradox. Yeah, exactly. So in those instances, then, well, it does make sense to kind of like, okay, well, let's step back a little, and that's not going to be offering you much utility anymore. But also to what you were saying earlier, Isaac, in terms of, I really feel like, at least growing up where I grew up and in my context, it seems like for most people that are living in the West right now, like God is dead, like you're not gonna pull that out. So that's why you need to have something that is meaningful and compelling moving forward. In terms of, I'm talking about like a Christian God or something.
Yes,
right,
dead,
because that,
for sure.
That I
100%.
Yes. That I 100% agree with, because whenever you get rid of a cultural glue,
dissolution.
Well, even more so than that, it's tribalism usually is what fills that void.
Yeah, well, I mean, that is what's happening for sure. The West is predicated on these fundamental principles that have been dissolved by like the mercury of postmodernism, and
science too helps a lot. Once you have scientific explanations, you don't need the religious ones.
Well,
but not.
And I would say too that what we've seen happen, sort of this God is dead modern world. It gets into our conversation that this might be like a whole other podcast, is the whole like what that whole means. It's the God's dead thing, or but I think what has been gotten at with people like we talk about Jung and probably even Wilbur, and just what we talk about even today is, and Peterson, of course, to a certain degree, maybe Sam Harris in a special way, is that that it's God is not the overarching societal, I don't know if you'd say ideology at that point, or the overarching societal.
I'd say the glue, like Connor did.
Yeah, well, and we talked about this, I think, a little bit when I was on your guys' podcast a couple weeks ago, where, you know, in the past, not even just the way Christianity was, but everybody in whatever world that they were in, whether they were in a village, a small town, a small area, they had an overarching. Well, yeah, they had an overarching narrative in whatever world that they were in that everybody kind of like bought into for the most part. Gebser.
That's this psychologist who created this conceptual, this whole thing. It's Jean
Right.
Gebser
So
and his
so
worldviews.
now as the world kind of came together and we had all of our worldviews and God views and everything else challenged, that all fell apart. But where God is sort of like, or at least the totality of being God is sort of alive or resurrected or able to be resurrected, maybe in the sort of like save your father from the belly of the whale sort of instance, is that it's inside the individual. And so now, so like before, although I guess my view would be that God was dead in a different way before, and that it was through false ideology that we had this emergent sort of principle of God in the world for a long time, at least for 1,000-ish, maybe 2,000 years plus, who knows, where that was kind of like a false God, but the real sort of like God totality of being experience would have to be not through ideology, but through personal experience. And so it was kind of always that way, but we had this false version of it.
Yeah,
Well,
that's like the historical transition.
So now it has
from
to happen through the individual, which is a lot of what Peterson
that's
talks
postmodernity.
about.
By the way,
that is
the
postmodernity.
Emergence of the self, or not the self, but the individual as sort of like the highest principle,
The highest.
or in
the I am.
especially in the Western canon. But go ahead, Connor.
Oh no, that's okay. You
You hit it on the head, like with
Okay.
with occult Western revivalism, like with the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, or like Helena Blavatsky's Theosophical Society, or like Crowley's all the stuff, all the Western magical stuff. That was all predicated on the I, because that's what led into the postmodern movement, where modernity was much more about, if we can just measure reality with better tools and better logic, we can understand the territory better. But that's the whole conflating the map for the territory thing, in which Ken Wilber calls it flatland, right? He calls it flatland. But what you're getting at, this whole like I thing, is very postmodern, and that is somewhat what Jordan Peterson actually tries to argue against, is in that shift from these sort of consensus reality structures being built on God and right principles and superordinates looking down upon us and judging us, and these like weird cultural narratives. We shifted to a place where like, I am personally responsible, I am my own God, I can make decisions, God is dead. And this sort of like capital I is where we're at in postmodernity. And I'm just chiming in here because I wanted to define that a little better for anyone listening. Because backwards maybe like 40 minutes, and we were talking about something dealing with these definitions, we didn't take the time to actually
Looks
define.
like Connor had something to good.
Well, I just think that it's not obvious to me that science and religion are trying to tackle the same issues. I mean, I think there's some overlap. I mean, and the main one obviously is trying to construct a creation narrative. But I don't think, because Jane, you said earlier that you think once the scientific theories are there, you don't need the religious theories. But the reason why I disagree is because I don't think science is trying to. I don't even think science wants to touch the or try to tackle the issues that the religious.
I don't know if I said that about scientific theories. I definitely feel that way about philosophical theories for sure, which is what like the project I'm kind of interested in.
Right.
Clearly, science can't speak to moral understandings,
right?
And
Thank
things
you.
like that.
Exactly.
Well, maybe it can to a certain degree. I just don't think it has done so yet.
When it tries to, though, and that's what I end up arguing with people so much on the internet, or people who come onto Isaac's channel or our channel sometimes, is that it's like this whole scientism movement, but that's not what we're talking about, so I won't go too deep. But
the whole like Hume's is facts from values is the other whole thing in the.
But I don't think that's what
Peterson
Jane was
debate.
getting at before with that statement, for sure. I don't think so.
No.
Yeah,
only to the extent that you view philosophy as kind of a meta science or something like that.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Gotcha. Okay,
not in terms of like empirical. I'm super anti social science and trying to kind of make objective claims about right and wrong through like, oh well, we did a study and we found out this is absolutely true. Like, no, you didn't.
Right. It worked in this culture, so it must work in this culture. Right?
Exactly.
I think we spoke on that briefly when you were on a couple weeks ago, Jane. But what is your, I guess, at least rough understanding of this? Seems like, I don't know if it's an area that you're with Harris or not, but that we can derive values from facts.
I think Sam does it all so badly, which is so sad because he has the right principles. That's what reading The Moral Landscape was so confusing to me, because I thought he was going to make arguments from a standpoint of determinism,
Mm.
talking about if you have an
Yeah.
understanding of determinism, you can have an emergent understanding of morality from that. And
Right.
then you can also introduce that, well, two-directional causality, then you can have a notion of personal responsibility as well. So then you've got moral prescriptions for yourself as well as to how you should relate to other people. But he doesn't make that argument. He talks about like, oh, well, they did a study and they found this, and then that
Yeah.
proves,
Oh,
and his whole
no.
principle too of like
Yeah, he tried
talking
to get
about
too scientific.
The
trying to
scientism
make
that
it
we're
too scientific.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't like the way that he frames things around like, oh well, we can all kind of agree upon there's a universe where there's like the worst suffering for everyone, and that's something we all want to avoid.
Yeah.
Giant claims.
To me, morality comes much more from your individual desires, and avoiding suffering can be part of that. But I don't want it to get Kantian in terms of like what I'm trying to think of what the term is, like having some greater good that everyone's trying to work
superordinate
towards.
good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
The
I don't buy
ideal.
into that.
And I guess that's my
Yeah.
biggest thing, and we're probably almost done, but that's my biggest thing with the whole Enlightenment philosophy, is that it's so much on,
Yeah.
it's almost like a mathematical
Yeah.
avoid suffering often is how that people interpret it, is, oh, look, we can quantify suffering, so therefore we can quantify
Everything.
morality.
Yeah.
And I guess this is more gets into like purely what humanism is, or what's the word, secularism is. But that always falls flat on its face for me, and I could see like we can get like that
too,
from
bro.
some things, but there's always going to be some instances where you want to go for suffering, whether that's taking care of your body differently, whether that's having babies will cause a lot of suffering.
To be fair, Sam does carve out a good caveat for that. He understands that you can have, make a sacrifice in the present for a reward in the future.
Yeah,
Almost like utilitarianism.
Yeah, well, I don't
Almost.
know. What do you think of that in general, Jane, as far as quantifying suffering as a way to understand morality or where to get ethics from?
I just don't think it's a very compelling approach.
Yeah. All right. So
you can approach anything any direction.
Yeah.
Like you truly can, and that's the beauty of like being an individual agent, right? In this hyper complex sandbox that we live in. But definitely sometimes people are more mistaken than others. But again, we have to integrate those mistakes instead of destroying those mistakes. Which is one reason why I don't necessarily feel like I have to change the minds of all people on planet Earth anymore, and why I'm open to having my own mind changed. Just because you can approach anything any direction.
To me, yeah, explanatory power is going to be the be all end all, right? Like, so long as you have the meta framework that kind of accounts for all of the idiosyncrasies and different ideologies, then that's the thing that you should be trying to develop.
Is in your whole system, you were arguing earlier about like logical process and why you don't answer certain questions just because you have such a practical outlook on the way that you view the world. It all makes sense now.
Yeah,
definitely.
more pragmatic.
I enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah,
it was
great.
Sure. So I think we're gonna wrap it up. Does anyone have anything to add, or we'll do this again probably, I don't know, sometime in February.
Sure. We should do a follow-up for sure, where we talk about some of the tangential questions that you were like, oh, that can be a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
Like
we
scientism
might get into that. So do you guys have anything else to add before we wrap it up? And I'll include everybody's links in the show notes.
No, it was super cool to meet you, Jane.
Yeah.
We'll all link up again, have more discussions. I'm definitely going to follow you. I'll listen to your podcast. It was very nice meeting you. So thank you for this conversation.
You guys as well.
It was really nice meeting you, Jane. It was really fun.
Yeah.
Too, Connor.
All right. So anything else you'd like to add, Jane, before we wrap it up?
Thank you so much for hosting, Isaac.
All right. Yeah, anytime.
Oh, I forgot Isaac. Sorry. He talks so much shit all the time in our friend circle.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if I should ever thank Isaac for anything.
Oh, no. I
refuse,
good fun
honestly.
to get the best out of you guys.
You're like my daddy. You trying to be my daddy, Isaac?
No. I only maybe in the podcasting world, but one day you will.
Once that record
surpass.
button starts, Isaac becomes dad. So
He's always like, sure you will. Sure you'll post your video.
Yeah.
Sure you will. Shut up.
All right.
Thanks, man. Thanks for hosting.
Yeah, anytime. So we'll do it again, and we'll maybe do different versions off and on over every few weeks or so. But and any listeners, check the show notes so you can find out more about the archive and Jane's Wonderland. And any sign outs you guys have to say before we sign out?
Just check the links, man. Check the links.
Yeah, I'm happy.
All right,
Yeah,
cool.
It was fun. It was a lot of fun. Thank you, everyone.
All right, thanks a lot, guys. Take care. Stay archetypal, and we'll see you around. Bye.